Chapter 3.
The procession through the passageway of the Telj-Khan Vagabond was led by Lando Calrissian, combat blaster in hand. Following close behind was R2, towing the equipment grid protectively behind him. Last in line was Lobot, with 3PO riding on the back of his contact suit like a child perched on the back of his father.
"This is my fault,"
Lando said, peering over his shoulder at them.
"I should have gone ahead and gotten a thrust belt for 3PO. Maybe even a complete thrust harness and power pack. Consumable refills for the contact suits, too."
"We had them, on Lady Luck," said Lobot. "Everything could not fit on one sled."
"I'd trade most everything on that grid for a couple of refill packs. I never thought we'd be in 0G, as long as it looks like we will be."
"Forever, maybe," Lando thought grimly. "It is an interesting design choice," Lobot said. "The Kella appear to have done everything they could to make it hard for us to move about in here. There is no artificial gravity, no spin. The bulkheads are non-magnetic and have no friction tracks, handholds, or zip lines."
"What's so interesting about that?"
"The Kella were planet dwellers," Lobot said, surprised by the question. "How did they expect to get around in this ship?" Lando grunted.
"Maybe the Kella are giant slugs as wide as this tunnel."
"Perhaps," said Lobot. "But even giant slugs are probably more comfortable in a gravity field. I can't help thinking that somewhere in this vessel there must be a switch that would make all of this much easier." The passage seemed to have no end. It curved away in front of Lando like an ever-receding horizon, teasing him with a promise it never fulfilled.
"How long has it been now?"
"R2's event recorders say we entered the Vagabond 3 hours, 8 minutes ago. We left our entry point 47 minutes ago," Lobot answered.
"Seems even longer than that,"
said Lando.
"Am I the only one who's noticed? Shouldn't we have run out of ship by now?"
"Obviously we haven't,"
"Nothing is obvious here,"
Lando said.
"We're cruising at a meter per second minus overhead for a couple of stops. 45 minutes is 2,700 seconds, and this ship is only 1,500 meters long. We should be a kilometer out in front of the bow by now."
"The conduits we saw on the surface of the Vagabond wind around it in complex patterns," Lobot said. "If we are inside one of those, as I believe we are, that could account for the length of this passage."
"No, it could not, because we're still heading forward, aren't we? If this passage had turned back, we would have noticed."
"Would we?" asked Lobot. "Without landmarks and reference, I find it difficult to be sure."
"You're right about that. No matter how hard I try, I can't keep a picture of this place in my head,"
Lando complained, turning to face the others.
"R2, let me see your map again."
R2's holoprojector flickered into life. The map superimposed the data from R2's inertial movement sensors over the scans of the Vagabond performed by Pakpakat's technicians, showing their path through it as a bright red line. The line wiggled back and forth like a low-frequency sine wave across the hull of the ship and extended out beyond it.
"See?"
Lando said.
"We are out in front of the ship."
"R2, are your gyros operating normally?" Lobot asked. The droid's affirmation was indignant. "Then how do you explain this data?" R2 chirped a curt reply.
"The ship is longer now."
3PO translated incredulously.
"What an absurdity. Even you can't be that foolish. You are obviously malfunctioning."
Lando sighed and surveyed the passage's face. They had dropped the words wall and bulkhead as inappropriate some time earlier.
"It makes as much sense as anything else,"
he said tiredly.
"So we've seen something of the tricks their technology can do. Maybe nothing about this ship is immutable, not even its dimensions. Maybe the Kella don't play fair."
"You have beaten rigged games in the past," Lobot said. "Yeah, I guess I have," said Lando. "But it helps a lot if you can watch the table for a while first." Kill the map, R2, but keep tracking us as best you can. We're going to pick up the pace a little. 2 meters per second. On my mark. Most of another hour dragged by before R2 made a discovery that set him to beeping agitatedly.
What is it?
Lando demanded.
R2 says that there is an irregularity ahead.
3PO said.
It may be an artifact of some kind.
Lando jetted ahead, scanning the passage phase hopefully.
Which side?
Ahead and high to your left, Master Lando.
Said 3PO.
I see it!
Said Lando.
Blast! It's tiny! Wait! Oh no!
What is it? Lando? Lando did not explain, but when the others joined him, they got all the explanation they needed. A fragment of metal diamond grid protruded from the face of the passage, and a short cord waved from its anchoring knot. 3PO gave voice to the unspoken.
Why? We are back where we started.
That's impossible, Lobot said with a touch of irritation.
Yeah, you'd think so, but how else do you explain this?
Lando said, gesturing. Perhaps it was moved, said Lobot.
How? You think there's someone else on this ship?
I do not know, said Lobot. This could be a copy of our marker, a deception. Our 2 sensors still indicate that we're heading toward the bow.
Oh, we are, for the second time, most likely. What kind of crazy ship are we on? This passage doesn't go anywhere, and it doesn't do anything.
It occupied us for 2 hours, Lobot pointed out.
So it did, and we've wasted those 2 hours and...
Lando checked his readouts.
About 9% of my thrust mass. Same for both of you, I'd guess.
This is most distressing. What do we do now?
3PO asked.
Well, we start playing smarter,
said Lando.
How much carbon line do we have?
Lobot knew the answer without looking. 2 spools, 5,000 meters each. Why?
If we keep going around in circles, we could find ourselves unable to get anywhere for lack of propellant. There's not enough grid to spare to make handholds the length of the passage, but there might be enough for line anchors. I think we better start stringing some hand lines now.
Lando said.
And they'll help keep us from getting fooled again.
Yes, we can build a topological map rather than a representational one, Lobot said. We will at least know the relationships between the places we have been, even if the exact geometry escapes us. Lando nodded.
Something had better start happening. I'm starting to get seriously annoyed.
Sometime later, and according to the counter on the line spool,
they had gone 884 meters down the passage, staking 4 improvised line anchors along the way when they came to the junction.
This is nuts,
Lando said, hovering in midair before the twin openings.
This passage didn't branch the last time we were through here.
If we've been through here before.
Don't start with me,
Lando said, turning. It was not a jest, Lobot said. It remains a possibility that these passages are channels or conduits, related in some way to the operation of the ship. What we have seen in here may have nothing to do with us.
Conduits for what? They're dry as a bone.
There are other types of fluids and flows, gases, energy plasmas, electrical charges, Lobot said, and conduits generally require stops, valves, and switches of some sort. This is likely to be one, directly ahead of us. There may be another somewhere behind us that placed us on this path. Lando slowly spun back to face the junction.
If I had a fat toe, a short toe, a black toe, a new toe, I would know where to go.
He chanted softly. What?
Pardon me, sir. It is a children's counting rhyme from Bassares.
3PO said.
Master Lando, may I make a suggestion?
Anytime, 3PO. The last thing I want is for the last thing I hear to be someone saying, "You know, I wondered about that earlier. I guess I should have spoken up."
Very well, Master Lando. My suggestion is that we should separate into two parties and explore both passages at the same time. This would be the most efficient method. If each party consists of a human and a droid, I believe we should be able to maintain communications, even if we become separated by some distance.
Not bad, 3PO,
said Lando.
We have two spools. We could set lines in both passages. Lobot?
I strongly advise against separating, Lobot said. Valves and stops which open seemingly at random can as easily close. It is also possible that we have been presented with this choice precisely for this purpose, to divide us. Lando frowned.
If we don't separate, which passage do we take?
Lobot shook his head. It will not matter, Lando. Just choose.
Very quickly, they discovered that
it did not matter. The passage Lando chose ended 300 meters later, after turning downward, inward, nearly 90 degrees. When they doubled back, the alternate passage led them to another junction that was the reverse of the first, and to another short passage that turned sharply before ending abruptly.
There is something down there,
Lando said, lingering as the others turned back.
Both dead ends go to the same place. The hyperdrive could be down there.
Lobot could tell that the Baron was powerfully tempted to test his theory by blasting a hole in the wall, and touched his shoulder with an outstretched hand. Come, the cyborg said.
I'm tired of this.
I know, said Lobot. But you know that disabling a hyperdrive and destabilizing one are two very different matters. We will find a better way. Lando glanced at his telltales.
All right,
he said.
But if we haven't found it, by the time these numbers reach single digits, I'm coming back here. I'm not just gonna wait for death, Lobot.
I would not expect that of you, Lobot said. But for now, please, my friend. They jetted back up the passage together, side by side. With an artfulness born of desperation, Lando and Lobot managed to improvise 41 line anchors from the equipment grid and the supplies attached to it. Spaced 200 meters apart, those anchors secured more than 8 kilometers of hand lines, covering 3 major passages and more than 15 branches. In the course of their explorations, the team catalogued 11 stop valves, 18 switch valves, and 3 different routes back to their original marker. The purpose of the mechanisms and the pattern of their movements remained impenetrable, but R2-D2's holographic map steadily took on more useful form, framing the unknown with the known. Through it all, the vagabond bored on through hyperspace, seemingly oblivious to the passengers within. The early fears faded. The vessel remained mysterious, giving up few of its secrets, but it was no longer menacing in its own right. The threat to their lives was as impersonal as the graph of an equation, one in which none of the variables was under their control. At a point when yet another unexplored passage had disappointed them by leading them to a passage already hung with handlines, by unspoken mutual consent they lingered there, to rest and to recover their resolve. Lando looped the slack of a hand line around one wrist and let it hold him in place.
How long is this jump now?
A little over 37 hours, Lobot said.
Going a long way to somewhere,
Lando sighed.
Let's see, 4 times 3.14 times 39 cubed divided by 3. By now, we could be anywhere in 250,000 cubic light-years of space. They'll need a telepath to find us.
You and I should sleep, said Lobot.
Why?
Sleeping will conserve our consumables, and human beings do not perform at peak efficiency when fatigued.
We don't get very much done when we're dead either,
Lando said.
The 5 hours we spend napping might be 5 hours we need to get out of this fix.
And the 5 hours we do not spend napping may result in one of us making a non-recoverable error.
We have the droids to keep us from making mistakes. They don't get tired,
Lando said.
Besides, I'm hungry. I'm kind of counting on turning up at an after-hours cafe somewhere around here.
Lando, that is not a rational expectation. Lando chuckled tiredly.
I know when I'm being silly,
he said.
Do you know when you're being stuffy?
Master Lando,
What is it, 3PO?
is it possible that this vessel could already have exited hyperspace without our knowing? Perhaps we were distracted by our other activities. We may not have gone as far as you fear.
No!
Lando said curtly.
I've never heard a ship growl like this one does, going in and coming out. We couldn't have missed it. I couldn't have, anyway. That's something I've been thinking about. Thinking about how long this ship's been jumping its shadows, hopping in and out of hyperspace. About how long it's been since it was in for a structural inspection and an overhaul. I had a friend in the yard at Azeri who showed me scanning hollows of the ships that had come through there, micro-fractures in the hyperdrive cage, the inner stringers, even the keel of a dreadnought. No, even if we had all the oxygen, all the water, all the hot cafe food we could eat, all the time we could ask for, I don't think I'd want to hang around here long enough to hear that growl too many more times. Because someday soon, no matter how well the killer tightened the nuts, this old crate is gonna turn herself into a deep space junkyard.
R2 cooed worriedly.
I wonder where Glorious is now.
Said 3PO.
That I won't think about.
Said Lando, and laughed.
I don't want to get depressed.
He released the hand line and floated free.
You rest if you want. Show me the map, R2. There's still a lot of ship to explore.
They found the coupling panel in the 71st hour of their imprisonment. It was pure luck that they did, since it appeared in a section they had already passed through twice and would not have returned to if a new passage they were marking had not brought them there. Nearly 2 meters long and more than a meter wide, the round-cornered panel was inset flush in the ceiling of the passage. Lando had established by fiat that the hand lines defined the right face of the passage, and all other directions derived from it. The panel was liberally decorated with sockets and projections of various heights, depths, and diameters, with the sockets clustered symmetrically in the center third and the projections flanking it.
Master Lando, what do you think it is?
Some sort of intelligence test, maybe.
Lando said, trying to peer through one of the larger diameter sockets.
Anyone feel up to taking it?
Why, it does. There's some resemblance to the busy box that Ambassador Nougat gave to Anakin Solo.
3PO said.
My, how he enjoyed spinning the wheels and pushing blocks through the holes.
Shut up, 3PO.
Yes, sir.
Lobot was carrying out his own examination of the artifact. 24 sockets in 2 sizes, 18 projections. I can see no obvious moving parts. The metal has a high sheen and reflectivity, and no protective finish, yet there are no scratches or scars, even in and around the sockets.
It looks like some sort of bus port to me.
Lando said.
Like the diagrac on the Falcon, or the maintenance cabinet on Lady Luck. Plug in here and you have access to the ship's systems.
That is what you have been looking for, said Lobot. How likely is it that you would find it?
It's the only mechanism we've seen in 9 clicks of passageway.
It is the only mechanism we have been able to recognize, said Lobot. But the design of this vessel apparently provides for mechanisms to be concealed until they are needed. I ask you to consider why this mechanism has appeared now.
You tell me.
Most likely because the ship will shortly need whatever function this mechanism serves.
Which gives us a chance to slip in and take care of ourselves,
Lando said.
These couplings weren't designed for us, but maybe we can make use of them anyway. Energy is energy. R2 can cope with thermal, plasma, or electrical ports. And data is data. If R2 can read it, 3PO can interpret.
Lando, you have no basis for concluding that this is a system port. Lobot pressed. "It is more likely that the function of this mechanism is related to the function of these passages."
Which is what?
Lando snapped.
Holding cell, ventilator, rodent maze, a fungi farm. Are you saying we're not supposed to touch this either? Blast it all. How long are we supposed to wait before we do something?
"You have not had more than 2 hours sleep in nearly 3 days," Lobot said. "Your sense of urgency has been heightened."
That's right.
Lando said.
I haven't had anything to eat in so long, I'd cut a friend dead for a fracking cracker. My water supply tastes like it's gone around 6 times already. Are you more machine than man? Doesn't any of this affect you?
"I am as human as you are," Lobot said. "I doubt that you could be any hungrier than I am. My water supply is as disagreeable to me as yours is to you. But I do not understand the discoveries we have made."
Then don't you want to learn more? I want the droids to try to interface with this port. That's all. No blasters. No creative structural renovations.
"Please listen," Lobot said earnestly. "I do not understand why structures as extensive as these have been inert throughout our tenure on this ship, or why we have been permitted to move about in them unimpeded. These questions trouble me, and I am concerned that the appearance of this artifact may signal the end of either or both of those conditions."
All the more reason for us to make the first move.
Lando said.
R2-3PO, come on up here. I want you to try to interface with the Vagabond.
Lobot turned toward the droids. "3PO, R2, I ask you to wait until we know more. None of our supplies are critical yet. We do not know what we are dealing with."
I am sorry, sir, but Master Luke placed us in the care of Master Lando.
3PO said, allowing R2 to tow him toward the panel.
We are obliged to follow his instructions, no matter what reservations you may have.
Thank you, 3PO.
Lando said, fixing Lobot with a baleful gaze, touched with a hint of smug triumph.
I'm glad to know that you are still on the team.
Whether it was due more to Lobot's misgivings or to R2's innate sense of self-preservation, the astromech droid proceeded cautiously in carrying out Lando's instructions, and Lobot was glad to see it. At first, R2 stopped a safe distance from the panel and began to scan it, his dome rotating back and forth as he brought different sensors to bear: optical, thermal, radionic, electromagnetic. 3PO called out the results of each reading to the two men, who were watching from opposite sides of the passage. Lobot already knew the results by the time 3PO pronounced them, for the droid, on his own initiative and without any notice to Lando, had opened another of his data registers to the cyborg's neural interface. It was a signal of support that Lobot accepted in silence, saying nothing that would betray the small mutiny. When the initial scans produced no obvious red flags, R2 moved in closer and extended his sensor probe. The scan head was too large to fit fully into the smaller sockets, but R2 brought it as close to the first of them as he could without actually touching it.
Field 0.0 gas,
said 3PO.
Flux density 1.602. Alpha rate 0. Beta rate 116. Charge polarity negative. R2, I don't understand a word of this. Will someone please tell me what it means?
R2 swiveled his head and emitted a sharp series of whistles, which 3PO did not translate.
I am trying to hold still,
3PO said, as R2 moved the probe to the next socket.
It's not my fault I wasn't designed for weightlessness. Most sensible beings live on planets where they belong.
The response from R2 sounded churlish even to Lobot's ears.
I don't care what you think,
3PO said.
Why, you're only a mechanic. I was meant for nobler purposes. I should be at a diplomatic reception, helping to forge peace between bitter rivals, arranging a dynastic marriage. How I miss the old days.
R2's response was an electronic bleat.
Very well, then,
3PO said haughtily.
See if I care. I don't need your help.
With that, the golden droid released his grip on R2's right tread support and folded his arms across his chest plate.
But I need your help, 3PO,
said Lando.
So stop squabbling with your brother and call out the numbers.
Why do you keep making that error, Master Lando? That egotistical little tyrant's no kin of mine.
3PO sniffed. I can help you, Lando, Lobot said quietly without explanation. Field 0.82 Gauss. Flux density 1.74. Alpha rate... Lando looked at Lobot with annoyance, a sight that gave Lobot surprising satisfaction. Neither of them saw 3PO reach out and clutch one of the projections on the panel to steady himself, but both heard a loud burst of static on the contact suit comm unit and saw a blue glow in the passage.
Gracious me,
3PO exclaimed. Quickly looking that way, Lobot saw that the end of the panel was crawling with blue-white snakes of energy. They were crackling between the tips of the projections, dancing up 3PO's arm nearly to the elbow joint, and rapidly growing more intense. 3PO, don't let go, Lobot began. The warning came too late. The moment his surprise abated, 3PO pulled back his hand in a reflex of squeamishness. An instant later, a massive, squirming bolt of energy leaped from the panel to 3PO's hand, flashed up his arm and one side of his head, and sprang from there to the face of the passage. Before anyone could react, it had raced away down the passage and disappeared, spreading as it went until it was dancing over the entire surface like a halo of blue fire. One finger of the bolt ran along the hand lines, leaving them crumbling into black dust in its wake. The bolt left 3PO convulsing and spinning in midair. His right arm was burned black and smoking from the servos and energizer controls. His head was frozen at an odd angle and quivering as though an actuator were caught in a feedback loop. Lobot loosed a string of curses he had forgotten he knew and started toward the injured droid. Lando stared dumbly for a moment, then did the same. But R2 beat both of them to 3PO, latching on and dragging him away down the passage in the opposite direction from the one the bolt had taken. As R2 passed Lando, the droid made a hostile noise.
I'm sorry,
Lando said, throwing his arms up in a gesture of surrender.
It's not my fault. Lobot, tell him it's not my fault.
Hastening up the passage after R2 and 3PO, Lobot jetted past Lando in purposeful silence. R2 would not allow Lando to approach 3PO. He had to content himself with watching from several meters away while Lobot and R2 hovered over the protocol droid and tried to assess the damage. From several meters away, the damage looked to be considerable. An R6 or R7 could have survived the jolt handily. The latest combat-rated droids were armored against power surges and induced currents up to and including a near-direct hit from a Class 1 ion cannon. But 3PO had been designed for wars of words. His buffers and breakers were minimal, and the bolt of energy from the panel had overwhelmed them. If the charge had passed across his body through the primary processors instead of up one side, 3PO would be dead. As it was, Lando could see that 3PO's right arm was rigid and useless at his side. The servo controllers burned and the linkages fused. Even worse, his speech synthesizer or vocal processor had been crippled. When he spoke, his voice phased and changed timbre, as though he were a million clicks away on a pocket comlink. Twice already he had halted in mid-sentence, as though stuck, searching for the most ordinary of words, something Lando had never heard him do before. After a few minutes, Lobot left 3PO with R2 and joined Lando. To Lando's surprise, there were no words of recrimination, only a businesslike coolness barely distinguishable from Lobot's usual demeanor. 3PO's arm is beyond repair. Given that we have no spare parts, Lobot said, R2 is trying to free the lateral actuator and restore freedom of motion to 3PO's head. He nodded past Lando at the equipment grid, which Lando had towed away from the scene of the accident. I need the toolkit.
In a moment.
Lando said.
What happened back there? Have you thought about it?
I need the toolkit, Lando, Lobot repeated, and moved to pass between Lando and the passage wall. Lando reached out and caught Lobot's forearm.
You were right about these passages. They're getting ready to...
Something moved at the periphery of his vision, and Lando's gaze flicked past Lobot to the droids, then past the droids to the growing glow where the passage bent out of sight.
Blast!
He exclaimed.
Hey, get away from the wall! Get away from the wall! R2, look out!
What? Lobot craned his head. Using his grip on Lobot's suit, Lando dragged him toward the center of the passage, just as the energy halo appeared at the horizon of their vision and sped toward them. It surrounded them for only a moment as it raced through on its course, but its passage made the hair rise on the back of Lando's neck. It's gone all the way around?
Yes.
Doesn't seem to have lost any strength at all, Lobot said in wonder.
No,
Lando said.
That's what I was trying to tell you. You were right. These are conduits, superconducting accumulators, perhaps even some sort of gas tube cascade generator.
For the weapons, Lobot said slowly. It has to be for the weapons.
That panel is the ballast, the source of the spark. 3PO created an arc path while it was building up to fire, probably prematurely. He may have caused the system to report a failure, buying us a little time as it resets.
The weapons are useless in hyperspace. That explains our reprieve.
It also answers your question about the panel, about why it showed up now.
Lando said.
Smart. She's a smart lady. The last thing I do before I enter an unfriendly room is check my weapon.
Testing the integrity of the system. She must be getting ready.
Wait,
Lando said.
Listen!
All at once, all around them, the ship began to groan and growl in a slow, deep voice. Lando released Lobot and dove toward the equipment grid, wresting the sensor limpet from its restraints. The limpet was secured in a harness of silk line with a single trailing cord ending in a loop.
I have to do this now!
Lando said.
R2! Map! What's the shortest way to the outer hull?
R2's reply was a squawk.
Point out the direction. I can't understand you.
He's not answering you, said Lobot. He's asking me why I'm not back with the tools yet. He closed his eyes. The lights on his interface blinked at a furious rate. Through there, he said. 18 meters. But I don't know what's between here and the hull.
I'll tell you when I get back,
Lando said. He drew his blaster, burned a hole in the direction Lobot had pointed, and was gone. With his thrusters holding his widely set feet against the outer bulkhead of the Vagabond, Lando pointed the cutting blaster down between his legs and squeezed the actuator. A perfect circle of hull vanished in a puff of gray smoke, which was instantly sucked out through the opening. The limpet had been floating freely, tethered to Lando's left wrist. Now it strained at the end of a taut line, rocking as the compartment's air rushed past it. Pocketing the blaster, Lando let the line play out through his gloved fingers until the limpet slipped through the opening. Only the cord on Lando's wrist kept it from escaping completely into space. Then he simply waited, watching the hull breach knit closed. When the opening had shrunk enough to prevent the limpet from being pulled back inside, Lando took up the slack and pulled the limpet back against the hull. Reaching through, he pressed the dual switches that activated the limpet's sensors and armed its attachment system. Letting a little line play out again, Lando waited until the hole had closed to the size of a peephole, then yanked the limpet toward him. There was an audible thwack as the crisscrossing anchor spines fired and drew the limpet flush against the hull. For insurance, Lando knotted the cord around the safety tab that had covered the limpet switches, pulling it snugly against the interface. Lando hoped that even if the ship was somehow able to slough off the limpet's barbed anchor spines, the harness and improvised stop would keep it in place. That job accomplished, Lando turned away to examine for the first time the compartments he had crashed through en route to the outer hall. Unlike in the accumulators, where the entire face of the passage itself gave off a pale yellow glow, the only light in the outer compartment came from the twin ear lamps located on either side of Lando's helmet. When he swept their beams through the dark volume that enclosed him, a great emptiness swallowed the light forward, aft, and around the circumference of the ship. It was as if he were alone in the darkest corner of space. Only when he looked up, away from the outer hull, near which he hovered, and back the way he had come, did the light catch and reflect to him any of the substance of the ship. And what the light revealed there made Lando shiver with a chill no warmer could drive away. For the lamp showed that the inner wall was covered with alien faces, a collage, a portrait gallery, a mural, a memorial, stretching as far as the light could carry, and likely beyond. There were thousands of different faces, or thousands of variations on the same face, each gazing out from its own hexagonal cell. The faces were unlike any Lando had ever seen, and yet he keenly felt the intelligence in the large, round eyes that seemed to seek him out. More than by any other gift, Lando had found his way by reading the faces of strangers and knowing them better than they knew themselves. He read in the sculpted, deeply lined faces of the Kella both strength and surrender, a settled wisdom and a thwarted curiosity, and most of all a terrible knowledge of the impermanence of life. The beings who had sat for these portraits and the artisans who had created them had known when they did so that these images might be all that survived them, and they had held nothing back. There was a circular gap in the mural where Lando had burned his way through it from behind. The supporting wall had healed, but the overlying portraits had not. 4 were damaged in varying degrees, 1 obliterated forever. Lando fought off sharp pangs of guilt as he jetted up toward the mural and reopened a hole at that same spot.
I'm sorry,
he said to the surviving faces as he left them behind.
but this is your tomb, your memorial. I'm trying to keep it from becoming mine. I like to think that if life meant this much to you, you'd be rooting for me to succeed.
Lando found the others where he had left them, still tending to 3PO. The golden droid was the only one to react strongly to his return, turning his head toward Lando and greeting him cheerfully.
Master Lando,
He said in a crackly voice. One glowing eye flickered.
what are you doing on Yavin for? Why are you wearing that costume? Do you know, you look rather like a droid.
3PO, take a look around.
Lando said.
Do you recognize this place?
The droid's head swiveled.
Oh, yes.
I see.
The Keller Vagabond.
I seem to have.
Had an accident.
He turned and clanged R2 on the dome with his good arm.
It is all your fault. You good for nothing, Saboteur. You belong in a waste compactor, along with all the other.
No,
Lando said sharply.
it was my fault. I gave the orders. I made the mistake. I'm sorry, 3PO. I promise you we'll get you put back to specs as soon as we get home.
I'm sure that my cleanliness was the approximate corpse of my mishap.
Said 3PO.
Don't try to talk, 3PO.
Lando said.
Just keep running your diagnostic. Your parser will map the damaged regions and relocate those functions.
Very well,
Master Lando.
The droid's head returned jerkily to the neutral position. Lobot shook his head in sympathy. Lando, the test charge, if that is what it was, has been around 4 more times. I could see it weaken when it passed your new hole, but other than that, it did not seem to lose any strength at all. I expect that it would still be circulating if the panel had not reabsorbed it the last time it passed. Lando acknowledged the report with a nod.
These passages are a nearly perfect energy bottle,
He said.
This explains a lot. about the power of their weapons. It must get pretty exciting when they're running a capacity charge through here.
I believe our consensus is that we have had enough excitement for now.
You're right. We need to get out of here. But there's something that has to be done first.
Lando said.
R2, I was able to place the limpet on the outside of the ship. I need you to pick up its signal and make it available to Lobot.
The little droid turned its dome away from Lando and remained mute.
R2, we need to find out where we are. Step 2 of our plan, remember? I don't know how long we can count on getting data from the limpet, and we don't know how long we'll be in real space.
Still, the droid was silent.
Lobot?
Lobot cleared his throat. R2 just said something rude to me about your leadership ability. Then he told me to tell you that he's on strike. Working to restrain a flaring temper, Lando said evenly,
R2, you're the only one of us who can receive the data from the limpet. If we don't have that data, we can't plan an escape. If we don't escape soon, we're going to run out of air, and you're going to run out of power. Is whatever point you're trying to make worth the 4 of us expiring?
R2 emitted one small beep. Receiving data, Lobot said. R2 said to tell you that he's doing it for 3PO, not for you.
I don't care if he does it for the Blood Prince of Thessalia, as long as it gets done,
said Lando.
How long will it take to get a navigation fix?
R2 is calculating the triangulation now, Lobot said. Lando, only one local star is in the spectral database. R2 is searching for other reference stars.
What? Where the frack are we?
One moment, Lobot said. Coordinates 091066052. Uncertainty due to measuring error 2%.
Triple zeros? That can't be right. That would put us in Sector 1.
Correct, Lobot said. We are presently 106 light-years past the border of the New Republic, in the core. The nearest inhabited system is Prakith.
Prakith.
Lando repeated.
Fogga Brill.
Excuse me?
At last report, Prakith was controlled by the Imperial warlord Fogga Brill.
Prakith is 8 light-years away.
Are there any other ships out there? Any security buoys, drones, probes, anything?
None that the limpet can detect. However, the hull of the Vagabond blocks a substantial portion of the sky. Lando muttered grimly.
Well, we're sure not going to be putting out any calls for help in this neighborhood. All right, let's get out of this accumulator while things are still quiet. We'll go right back through where I just came out. I don't know quite where it puts us, but nothing bad happened the first time.
R2 trilled.
What?
Never mind, Lobot said. You don't want to hear. Lando thought dark thoughts about lax maintenance schedules and the consequences of letting droids go too long without a memory wipe. Your decision, Luke, but they've both got entirely too much personality for my taste. But he kept those thoughts to himself.
Once we're through,
He continued,
I'd like to see if we can avoid blowing any more holes in the walls.
Lobot nodded approvingly at that.
But that means one of us is gonna have to solve the puzzle of what a Kelador looks like and how to open it.
Lando said. Then he looked directly at R2.
So the first thing we're gonna do when we get over there is get 6 hours rest. All of us. I should have insisted on it sooner. I'm sorry, R2. I don't know if it would have changed anything, but I never meant for 3PO to get hurt.
R2's dome swiveled back toward Lando. He said, He told me to tell you that he is considering giving you a second chance, said Lobot. Lando nodded, drawing the blaster from its pouch.
You tell him for me that that's all a smart player should need.